Hi, this is Rachel from ThinkingAudit. Welcome to my latest mind map. I'm focusing on the 3 lines of defence. You may well be aware that the IIA Global is this year in 2019 going to update and reissue a position paper on the 3 lines model, and I thought therefore before that came out it was a good time for me to take stock and think about my own thoughts and experiences of the 3 lines of defence. So if we think about where it came from, this is one of those slightly odd frameworks that no one seems to really know who came up with the 3 lines of defence. It is fairly widely recognised, I have to say, albeit perhaps more in the internal audit profession. It's been really promulgated by the Institute of Internal Auditors. However, they didn't globally issue anything with it probably until 2013. And that guidance links very much to COSO. They've mapped the 3 lines model to the COSO principles in there. Earlier than that, in 2010, the ECIIA and FIRMA, which is a European risk management organisation, put together some guidance on the EU 8th Company Law Directive. And that was one of the earlier documents really to set out what the 3 lines of defence look like graphically, and certainly to talk about it within a piece of guidance. But I think it's been around longer than that. I think 3 lines of defence has probably been around for about 20 years now, and I was always led to believe that it's one of the big 4 accounting firms that originally came up with a model. However, I can't find anything that supports that, but certainly I think within financial services especially, the model has been recognised for quite a long time now. And if you research anything about 3 lines of defence, then a focus on financial services in the early days certainly comes up. What I want the focus of this mind map really to be is just taking stock of how the 3 lines of defence is used and perceived today. And throughout this, I've actually included some useful links. So I've got a link here to the FIRMA document and to the position paper, the 2013 position paper from the IIA. If you download this from the website thinkingaudit.co.uk, all of the hyperlinks are there for you to use. So where are we now? What does the 3 lines of defence look or feel like now in terms of how it's recognised? I think it's fair to say it is recognised. I noticed that Richard Chambers of the Global IIA, in a blog in December 2018, said that this model had widespread acceptance and popularity. To me, that felt maybe a little over-egging it, and I wondered if acceptance maybe reflects that sometimes it can be slightly lukewarm. I've certainly seen some lip service and some blurred lines between the different lines of defence. So what we do see currently, we do see quite a lot of talk about assurance mapping, which I think is a useful tool, but it's fair to say some organisations find it too complicated, others have risk creating an industry of assurance mapping instead of providing assurance. But I do believe the 3 lines of defence has a role to help organisations clarify various roles and responsibilities. And at the simplest level, it really can be just that. Certainly as chair of an audit and risk committee myself and a non-executive director, I find the 3 lines of defence model as a simple concept quite useful, just to help when we're looking at our greatest risks and emerging risks. It helps us understand how do we know what we think we know, where do we know that from, how do we know it, and how much trust or confidence do we have in that knowledge. And some of that is about where are we getting assurance, and therefore the independence and objectivity of that assurance. So while we don't talk a lot about the 3 lines of defence model, we do think about the different sources of assurance and therefore how independent they are, and I think that's useful. I also undertook a bit earlier this year a bit of a snap survey on social media. The results were quite interesting, and one of the things that came out there is that actually the 3 lines of defence is probably well recognised but not embedded. I want to look next at what the 3 lines of defence really means, really looks like in practice, because that will be the driver for the future of the model whatever that model looks like. And some of the things that I was thinking about and really reflecting on, and using this mind map to help me reflect on that, is really about, is this defence or is it assurance? And I think the model refers to both, which perhaps is one of the challenges or weaknesses of the model. So there are 3 lines of defence, very much the first line in management, the second line, which typically is around risk management, compliance functions, etc., and the third line usually being internal audit. Each of those is a third line of defence, and yet each is also providing assurance. And I think there's a mixture there of assurance that may be monitoring and assurance that may be the nature of the objective assurance that we would refer to within internal audit. Something that I often see when people are assurance mapping, they'll look at what assurances exist, tend to see far less about where does that assurance go, who is it designed for, who is it provided to, and how is it reported. And perhaps one of the reasons for that is because I think the 3 lines of defence in some sectors and some industries is still really just the domain of internal audit. We see this still very much as something that internal audit understand, internal audit use to help them when they're developing audit plans, looking at other sources of assurance and prioritising where resources will be focused. I think there's something here about organisational culture and assurance. Where does the assurance go to, and what is the assurance on? And I think what we see about 3 lines of defence is that it only really works if all of the lines are focusing on the right things. Therefore, I do believe that the 3 lines of defence need to really focus on risk and risk management, on control, and also on outcomes. All 3 of those need to be considered. I found a really interesting document about how well the 3 lines of defence is used and understood, and I've provided a link to it. It includes some worrying words and a section about signs you are living a lie, and I just thought, for internal auditors in particular, that small section of the document was such a useful thing to look at whenever you're looking at risk maturity and governance. Just some indicators there to think about and to challenge the organisation about, if we're using the 3 lines of defence, are we really using it, or have we just played lip service? I've mentioned the global IIA's review this year, so there will be a new position paper out for public comment later this year. I believe we will see more in the future from IIA Global and others about the role of the board in terms of the 3 lines of defence. In terms of whatever the model looks like, the role of the board could be clearer, and not just as a recipient of assurance, but as an active participant in defending the business. I've also included a link here to 5 lines of assurance. Some of you, I'm sure, will be aware of Tim Leach, and he's been very vocal and put forward some, I think, quite strong thoughts. He's advocating 5 lines of assurance. And while I'm not convinced yet that I completely agree with the 5 lines of assurance, some of the things that I do find very strong in that are the focus on where does the board sit on that. And I think focusing on assurance rather than defence, I think, could be a positive thing. I've provided a link to the 5 lines of assurance document on Tim Leach's website. And for me, that does make the link between some of the thoughts that I've had around, should it be defence, should it be assurance, and being really clear about what we mean by both and what the model is really about. So summing up, for me, I think the 3 lines of defence model is a good thing. However, in too many places it's not really used, other than maybe by internal auditors. If it's going to be really well used, I think it has to be part of the governance structure of an organisation, and therefore it needs to be embedded within the way that you manage risk and monitor and report on risk. I think it's positive that there's a review being undertaken. The model's been around for quite a long time now, and it's time to just take stock, see how well it's working. For me, what will be really beneficial if we see more clarity around the role of the board, and that role being more than just a recipient of assurance. So thank you for listening to and watching this latest mind map. You can download this as a PDF with all the links and the useful references from the website www.thinkingaudit.co.uk. I'm expecting to focus on 3 lines of defence again a bit later in the year when we know what comes out of that global position paper update.